Welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into one of the most talked about films of 2026, a movie that has taken the world by storm and proven once and for all that fashion, ambition, and a perfectly delivered whisper from Meryl Streep never go out of style. We are talking about The Devil Wears Prada 2, the long-awaited sequel to the iconic 2006 film that defined a generation. So sit back, get comfortable, and let's get into every single detail you need to know about this movie. The Devil Wears Prada 2 is a 2026 American comedy-drama film directed by David Frankel and written by Aline Brosh McKenna. It is a direct sequel to the 2006 film The Devil Wears Prada, and it sees Meryl Streep, Anne Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci reprising their roles, joined by a powerful ensemble of new cast members including Justin Theroux, Lucy Liu, and Kenneth Branagh. The film is set 2 decades after the events of the first film and follows Andy Sachs as she helps Miranda Priestly navigate a new media landscape and the very real corporate threats to the survival of Runway magazine. To understand the scale of what this film represents, you have to go back to where it all started. In 2006, audiences met Miranda Priestly, the domineering and terrifying head of Runway magazine, in The Devil Wears Prada, an adaptation of Lauren Weisberger's best-selling novel of the same name. Meryl Streep's Miranda Priestly became the boss from hell to burgeoning journalist Andrea Andy Sachs, played by Anne Hathaway. The movie was an enormous success, grossing over $326 million worldwide, and immediately sparked passionate debates about its depiction of the fashion industry, ambition, and the price women pay for success. Now, 20 years later, the sequel has arrived and it has surpassed every reasonable expectation that anyone could have had for it. Getting this film made was not a simple journey. Both Streep and Hathaway were initially hesitant about returning to these characters. Streep had indicated she was not interested, while Hathaway expressed a desire to work with the same people but on something entirely new. So how did this film end up getting made? The answer is a combination of perfect timing, the right creative team, and a studio that recognized what was sitting in front of them. In July 2024, it was reported that Walt Disney Studios, the parent division of 20th Century Studios, was actively developing the sequel. Negotiations began that month with Aline Brosh McKenna returning to write the screenplay, the same writer responsible for the original. Streep, Hathaway, Emily Blunt, and Stanley Tucci all agreed to come back. A budget of $100 million was committed to the production, almost triple what the original film cost to make. The same director and the same writer from the first film returned, meaning this sequel carried the full creative DNA of its predecessor from the very beginning. Plot. Now let us get into the story, because this is where things get truly interesting. 2 decades after leaving her position as an assistant at Runway magazine, Andrea Andy Sachs has become a respected and accomplished reporter in New York. Her entire newsroom is abruptly laid off by text message during an awards ceremony. Meanwhile, Miranda Priestly is under fire at Runway for failing to vet a brand piece about a company that turns out to use sweatshop labor. The magazine's reputation is in serious trouble, and Miranda needs help from someone she can actually trust. This sets the stage for a reunion that no one saw coming but everyone needed. Andy is brought back to Runway, this time as its features editor, in order to help Miranda secure the magazine's future in a rapidly shifting journalistic and fashion landscape. The dynamic has completely flipped. Andy is no longer the wide-eyed assistant terrified of her boss. She is now a mature and confident professional being brought back into a world she once fled, and this time she comes back with leverage, experience, and a fully formed identity. 20 years after Andy's challenging and life-changing months at Runway, Miranda faces a magazine publishing industry in total flux and reunites with a more confident and mature Andy. Together they must face Miranda's former first assistant Emily, now a major player at a luxury brand, who has her own complicated and deeply personal agenda in all of this. The film follows Miranda's struggle against Emily, her former assistant turned rival executive, as they compete over advertising revenue amidst declining print media and Miranda navigating what could be the final chapter of her reign at Runway. The story ultimately becomes about power, survival, reinvention, and what happens when the world that once made you the most feared person in a room suddenly starts crumbling around you. For Miranda Priestly, the digital age and the collapse of print media represent an existential crisis, and Andy Sachs, of all people, turns out to be her best and most unexpected hope at finding a way through. Cast. Let us talk about the people bringing this story to life, because the cast of this film is genuinely extraordinary. Meryl Streep returns as Miranda Priestly, and by all accounts she is absolutely magnetic in the role. Critics have noted that Streep still wears Miranda Priestly like a finely tailored suit, and that the sequel is dressed to the nines in off-the-rack wish fulfillment alongside some genuinely trenchant observations about the state of modern media. Anne Hathaway is back as Andy Sachs, and this time she is playing the role with 20 years of lived experience baked into the character. The contrast between who Andy was in 2006 and who she is now forms the emotional backbone of the entire film. Emily Blunt returns as Emily Charlton, and by most accounts she steals significant scenes throughout the movie. Almost 20 years after making their iconic turns as Miranda, Andy, Emily, and Nigel, all four original leads come back to the fashionable streets of New York City and the sleek offices of Runway magazine in the eagerly awaited sequel. Stanley Tucci is back as Nigel Kipling, the wise and witty art director of Runway who serves as both confidant and comic relief and who gets his own moment of genuine triumph in this film. Kenneth Branagh joins the cast to portray the husband of Miranda Priestly. This is a significant new dynamic added to Miranda's character, giving her a personal and domestic life that the original film largely kept entirely off-screen. The film also introduces an all-new ensemble of characters including Simone Ashley, Justin Theroux, Lucy Liu, Patrick Bramall, Caleb Heron, Helen J. Shin, Pauline Chalamet, B.J. Novak, and Conrad Ricamora. Tracy Toms and Tibor Feldman also reprise their roles as Lily and Irv from the first film. Lady Gaga also appears in the film and contributes to its original music. Release date and trailer info. The first teaser trailer was released on November 12, 2025. It was reportedly the most viewed comedy trailer in 15 years, with 181.5 million views in its first 24 hours alone. That number tells you everything about how hungry audiences were for this movie. Then things got even bigger. At the beginning of February 2026, the studio dropped a more formal and complete trailer showing the reunion between Miranda and Andy, as well as Emily and Nigel. The trailer was viewed over 220 million times in its first 24 hours, making it the most watched trailer in the studio's entire history. The second trailer included a preview of an original song called Runway, performed by Lady Gaga and Doekiai. The track features a house pop style and was released as a single on April 9, 2026. Lady Gaga also performs another original song called Shape of a Woman in the film. The score was composed by Theodore Shapiro, who also scored the original film, featuring 20 tracks totaling 39 minutes of original music. The film premiered on April 20, 2026, in New York, and was released in theaters across the United States by 20th Century Studios on May 1, 2026. Box office and reception. The numbers this film has produced are nothing short of historic. The Devil Wears Prada 2 opened to $77 million domestically and $234 million worldwide in its very first weekend. That made it the third best domestic debut of 2026. The biggest opening of Meryl Streep's entire career, and the highest opening for a traditional comedy since Pitch Perfect 2 in 2015. Reviews were mixed among critics, but audiences were far more enthusiastic and awarded it an A- grade on CinemaScore exit polls. Nearly 75% of opening weekend crowds were women. In its second weekend, the film added another $43 million from 4,200 North American theaters, declining only 44% from its debut and bringing its North American total to $144.8 million. Internationally, the film collected $288.4 million, for a global total of $433 million after just 2 weekends of release. Globally, the sequel tallied $233 million in its first 3 days alone, which is 72% of what the entire original Devil Wears Prada generated during its whole theatrical run in 2006. That is an astonishing achievement for any film, let alone a comedy-drama sequel featuring no superheroes, no explosions, and no special effects spectacle. With its all-star cast and an empowering story that fittingly expands the saga, The Devil Wears Prada 2 has proven that a classic can be restyled with the right accessories. Filming locations and production details. Filming occurred in New York City, Newark, New Jersey, and Milan, Italy. Principal photography began on June 30, 2025, and filming wrapped in October 2025. The production gained access to some of the most iconic real-world fashion and luxury locations in both New York and Italy. In New York, the production was allowed to film at the Dior boutique at 57th Street and Madison Avenue before it opened to the public. They filmed in the lobby of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. For Emily's office, newly opened space in the Hudson Yards development was used. Marc Jacobs allowed the production into his fitting rooms, and the crew received permission to use the same townhouse that had served as Miranda's home in the original film, bringing a beautiful continuity to the visual language of both pictures. An important airport scene was shot at Newark. Stanley Tucci and Meryl Streep filmed at Dolce & Gabbana's Milan Fashion Week show. Filming took place in Milan from October 6 to 18th. Donatella Versace was seen on set filming a cameo appearance, and Lady Gaga was confirmed to have a role during the Milan production period. One final detail that deserves a mention is how the production chose its working title during casting. The casting calls for the movie used the title cerulean, referring to the color at the center of Meryl Streep's most famous and quoted monologue from the first film, the one about how the color of a sweater in a fashion magazine eventually makes its way down through the culture until it reaches everyone. It is the kind of detail that speaks to how deeply the filmmakers love this story and how seriously they took the responsibility of honoring what came before. The Devil Wears Prada 2, Complete Story. The story of The Devil Wears Prada 2 begins exactly where life has taken its characters after 20 years away from each other. It is a story about survival, reinvention, power, betrayal, and what it means when the world you built your entire identity around starts crumbling beneath your feet. It is also a story about how people from very different walks of life, with very different values, are sometimes forced by circumstance to need each other in ways they never anticipated. The opening, Andy loses everything. The film starts with Andy Sachs attending an awards ceremony with her colleagues at the Vanguard, the respected journalism outlet where she has been working as a reporter for years. 2 decades have passed since she walked away from Runway magazine and Miranda Priestly, and in that time Andy has built exactly the kind of career she always wanted. She has traveled the world, chased important stories, and earned the respect of her peers. She is about to receive an award at this ceremony, a recognition of her work and the kind of validation that feels like proof that she made the right decision all those years ago when she chose her integrity over her ambitions. Then, just before her name is announced, Andy's phone buzzes. Then every phone in the room buzzes. Andy and her whole team receive the news of their termination via text message, right there at the awards ceremony, in the middle of the event meant to celebrate their work. In one of the film's sharpest and most painfully contemporary moments, an entire newsroom is laid off by a cold, impersonal text message during the very evening designed to honor them. It is a gut punch that captures exactly what has been happening to journalism across the world for years. There is no warning, no conversation, no dignity in how it is done. Andy steps up to claim the stage anyway and delivers an impassioned, unscripted speech about the importance of journalism despite the layoffs. Standing at the podium with tears in her eyes and fury in her chest, she talks about why journalism matters, why the work they were doing was real and necessary, and why the people who just got fired by techs deserve better than what just happened to them. It is a raw and emotional moment, and the room responds to it powerfully. The speech goes viral almost immediately, spreading across social media and capturing the attention of people far outside that ceremony room, including people inside the world of Runway magazine. The crisis at Runway. At Runway, Miranda Priestly faces the fallout of a major scandal of her own. The magazine has appeared to endorse a company called Speedfash, and it has come to light that Speedfash operates sweatshops. Miranda is under enormous fire for having approved a piece about the brand without properly vetting its labor practices. The magazine is taking hits from every direction simultaneously. Advertisers are rattled, the public is angry, and the reputation of the most powerful fashion publication in the world is in genuine and serious danger. Nigel and Miranda's new assistant Amari are working by her side as she attends fashion events and tries to manage the damage. Miranda is also now married to a man named Stuart, a detail that adds a personal domestic dimension to her life that the first film never explored. This new version of Miranda is still formidable, still ruthlessly controlled, still the most intimidating person in any room she enters. But there is something different about her too. The world around her has changed, and for the first time in her life, Miranda Priestly is not entirely in command of what happens next. Irv Ravitz, the magazine's chairman and the man who has always been the power behind Runway's corporate throne, calls with urgency about handling the debacle and protecting the brand. His son Jay is present and quick to share the video of Andy's viral speech with his father, and this sets off a chain of events that will pull Andy Sachs back into Runway's orbit in ways either woman could have anticipated. Andy returns to Runway. Moved by Andy's viral speech about the importance of journalism, Irv reaches out with an offer for her to return to Runway in a features department role and help Miranda steer the magazine through its current storm. Andy's colleagues at the Vanguard encourage her to take the opportunity, seeing it as a chance to influence the magazine from a position of real power rather than remaining on the outside looking in. It is later revealed that it was actually Nigel who sent the video of Andy's viral speech to Irv in the first place, strategically engineering her rehiring at Runway. This act of loyalty and careful thinking demonstrates Nigel's genuine belief in Andy's abilities and his quiet desire to bring her back into the fold. He saw that Andy was exactly what Runway needed in this moment, and he found the right way to make it happen without making it look like it was his idea. Andy returns to the building, and the reunion with Miranda is exactly as one might expect. Miranda barely remembers her, dismissing her as one of the Emilists, which is both a deliberate slight and, in Miranda's world, a deeply cutting way of reducing a person to their function rather than their identity. Andy was one of many assistants who passed through Miranda's life. That Miranda cannot be bothered to distinguish between them is its own kind of statement about how little individuals matter in her world. But Andy is different now. She is not the wide-eyed young woman who once shook in the elevator. She is a seasoned journalist with her own professional identity, and she has come back on her own terms. Emily Charlton, A Life After Runway. One of the most important revelations of the film involves what has become of Emily Charlton, Miranda's former first assistant who spent the entire original film being brittle, impeccably dressed, and fiercely loyal to a boss who barely acknowledged her humanity. Emily now works at Dior as a senior executive, and she helps Runway stay afloat by maintaining critical advertising revenue from the brand. Emily has built herself a powerful and stylish life in the fashion industry. She is sharp, successful, and still perfectly put together at all times. But she carries something with her that has never fully healed. We learn that Miranda pushed Emily out of Runway years ago because she did not believe Emily had what it truly takes to be successful at the magazine. And it was Miranda herself who then secured Emily her position at Dior, essentially removing her from the inner circle by pushing her out the door with a recommendation that looked like a gift, but was really a dismissal. Emily was told, in Miranda's indirect and devastating way, that she was not good enough for Runway. That wound has been open for years, even as Emily has built an impressive and genuine career around it. Andy visits Emily for a brief catch-up and learns that she is divorced with 2 children and has come to believe that fashion is now far more lucrative in retail than in publishing. The 2 women circle each other carefully, aware of their complicated shared history and what they each represent to the other. Andy was the girl who arrived and was immediately chosen over Emily for Paris. Emily was the girl who devoted everything to Runway and was eventually pushed aside. They are connected by the same woman and the same institution, and that connection has never entirely dissolved. The Sacha Barnes interview. Andy learns from a colleague that Miranda has long wanted an exclusive interview with Sacha Barnes, a recently divorced billionaire who took a significant financial settlement from her ex-husband Benji. Andy pushes hard to make the meeting happen, and in a move that is a direct callback to the lessons she learned inside Runway the first time, she tells Miranda she has already secured the interview before she has actually done so. She learned under Miranda that the job requires you to make impossible things happen and that you present your boss with outcomes, not obstacles. Once Andy lands the interview date, she and Miranda travel to Sacha's villa for the sit-down. Sacha reveals that she is happier and more successful after leaving her marriage than she has ever been, and she is now engaged to a new man. She allows Runway to break this news exclusively. The interview is a genuine triumph for Andy's features department, and it marks the moment when Miranda begins, slowly and without ever saying so directly, to see the real value in having Andy back. Andy stays up late writing, producing journalism that has both elegance and substance, and slowly starts rebuilding Runway's credibility one story at a time. Andy's new romance. Andy's friend Lily takes her apartment hunting, and at one of the open houses they visit, Andy meets Peter, an Australian contractor who helped design the building. They connect immediately. Peter is warm, grounded, and completely outside the world of fashion and media. He represents everything that Andy walked away from Runway to find the first time around. He is real, unpretentious, and genuinely interested in who she is rather than what she can do for anyone's career. Meanwhile, Andy's friend Talia from the Vanguard is in talks with a publisher about Andy writing a tell-all book about her time working for Miranda Priestly. The book would almost certainly be a bestseller. But Andy is afraid that if Miranda found out, the consequences for her career would be severe. The book deal becomes a thread of guilt and temptation running quietly underneath everything else happening in the story. Andy knows that book would be her most commercially successful piece of writing. She also knows that writing it would be a betrayal of a woman who has, in her strange and often cruel way, been something like a mentor to her. Irv's Lake House. Over a weekend, Miranda invites Andy to her lake house, where she has also invited Irv, Jay, and various celebrity guests. It is a rare glimpse into Miranda's private world, and it shows Andy a side of the famous editor she has never quite seen before. Miranda is maneuvering, as she always is, but there is also something almost vulnerable about her in this domestic setting. She is a woman who has given everything to her magazine and who is now watching the world she has dominated begin to shift away from her. Miranda speaks to Andy privately about how Irv is planning to promote her to global head of content for all of Elias Clark's magazines, with the features department receiving a significant budget increase. This is the moment when both Miranda and Andy allow themselves to believe that things might actually be turning around for Runway. The magazine appears to have a future. Their collaboration is working. And then the worst happens. Irv dies, Jay takes over. Irv Ravitz dies of a heart attack during the weekend party at his lake house. His sudden death triggers a massive power shift inside the entire Elias Clark Corporation. His son Jay takes over as chairman and immediately begins implementing cost-cutting measures that threaten Runway's status and its survival in a fundamental way. Jay Ravitz is not his father. He does not love fashion. He does not understand or particularly care what Runway represents culturally. He sees a struggling print magazine in an era of digital media and makes the cold, businesslike calculation that the way to fix the parent company's finances is to gut the thing that costs the most. He brings in McKinsey consultants to assess the situation, and everyone is stunned when Miranda tolerates his suggestions to cut back on everything, including Andy and Nigel's departments. The budget that was just promised to the features department evaporates. Resources disappear. And in one of the film's most memorable and genuinely unsettling images, Miranda Priestly flies economy class. Miranda Priestly in coach is Miranda Priestly diminished, and watching it happen carries a real weight. The pressure and stress of the situation cause Andy to lash out at Peter, and he decides to step back until she has calmed down. The demands of being inside Runway again, with all of its impossible politics and relentless pressure, are pulling Andy back into old patterns of behavior. She is losing herself in the work the same way she did the first time, and the person paying the price is the one relationship in her life that has nothing to do with fashion or ambition. The Milan plan and the betrayal. As everyone travels to Milan for Fashion Week, Andy goes behind Miranda's back to seek help from Emily. The plan they discuss is to arrange a meeting between Emily's billionaire boyfriend Benji Barnes and Jay Ravitz, with the intention of getting Jay to sell Runway to Benji. It is a clean and elegant solution. A private buyer with enough money to acquire the magazine from a chairman who has no attachment to it. Benji buys Runway. Miranda remains as editor-in-chief. The magazine is saved. Everyone gets what they want. Except that is not what Emily wants at all. While Andy operates under the assumption that they are working together to purchase Runway in order to preserve the magazine and keep Miranda in her position, Emily is secretly planning something entirely different. She intends to use the acquisition to have Miranda fired and install herself as the new head of the magazine. Emily has been playing a longer game than Andy realized. She agreed to help not out of loyalty or friendship but because she saw in this moment an opportunity for the revenge she has been quietly nursing for 20 years. Miranda pushed her out. Made her feel inadequate. Gave her Dior as a consolation prize while keeping the real prize, the editor-in-chief chair, for herself. Now Emily intends to take it. But when they finally reveal the plan to Miranda, she throws it back in their faces. Miranda already knows what Emily is planning. Miranda Priestly did not survive decades at the top of one of the most cutthroat industries in the world by being caught off guard. She saw through Emily's motives from the very beginning and has been aware of the double cross the entire time. She knows exactly why Emily agreed to help. And she refuses to be maneuvered by anyone, least of all by a woman she once mentored and then dismissed. Andy is horrified when Miranda reveals what is happening. She does not believe it at first. But Emily, cornered and exposed, finally confesses under pressure. And in doing so, she gives voice to a resentment that has been building inside her for 20 years. Miranda made her feel like she was not enough. Miranda discarded her. And Emily has been waiting, perhaps without even fully admitting it to herself, for the chance to make Miranda feel exactly what she felt. Nigel's moment. In the chaos of the Emily situation in Milan, there is also a moment of grace that speaks to another long-standing piece of unfinished business. Miranda has to rush away from a key industry event because of the crisis that is unfolding around Emily's exposed plan. But before she goes, she does something unexpected. Andy has quietly pointed out to her that she has been taking Nigel for granted for decades, and with that gentle nudge landing somewhere in Miranda's consciousness, Miranda asks Nigel to represent Runway at the event and deliver the speech in her place. It is a significant gesture. In the first film, Miranda betrayed Nigel in Paris without hesitation or apology, sacrificing his career opportunity to protect her own position at Runway. The audience never forgot it. And here, 20 years later, in a moment that is smaller in scale but enormous in its meaning, Miranda gives him the stage. She lets him represent the magazine to the world. She lets him have the spotlight that she has always kept entirely for herself. It is not an apology. Miranda Priestly does not apologize. But it is acknowledgement, and from Miranda, acknowledgement is the closest thing to an apology that anyone will ever receive. Sasha saves the day. With Emily's plan completely exposed and the Benji deal now poisoned beyond recovery, Miranda and Andy work together behind the scenes with urgent purpose. They need an alternate buyer, someone with the financial resources to acquire the magazine from Jay Ravitz before he can destroy it, and they need to find that person immediately. The answer turns out to be sitting right in front of them. Andy spends an entire day working the phones, calling every potential buyer she can think of, driven by the same relentless determination that once made her the best assistant Miranda Priestly had ever had, and that now makes her one of the finest journalists and dealmakers in the room. And the buyer they find, the person who ultimately steps forward to save Runway, is Sasha Barnes. The same woman whose exclusive interview Andy fought so hard to land. The same billionaire who confided in Andy and trusted her with the story of her new life. The relationship that Andy built through her journalism, through the honest and respectful way she approached Sasha as a subject and as a person, directly rescues the magazine at its most desperate moment. Sasha swoops in and acquires not just Runway but all of Elias Clark from the Ravitz family. The entire company changes hands. And with that, the magazine is secured. Miranda will remain as editor-in-chief. The features department will survive. The people who work at Runway, the art directors and writers and stylists and assistants, still have their jobs. The deal is done, and it was done because Andy Sachs did what good journalists do. She built a real relationship based on genuine respect, and that relationship turned out to be worth more than anyone had anticipated. The book. As Andy and Miranda leave Sasha's villa together after everything has been resolved, Miranda says something that stops Andy completely. She tells Andy that she knows all about the tell-all book deal. She has known about it for some time. And then she tells Andy to write it. She says that people should know there is a cost. It is one of the most stunning and quietly moving moments in the entire film. Miranda Priestly, who has spent her entire career controlling her own narrative with absolute precision, who has survived decades at the top of an industry that destroys most people who enter it, is telling the woman who worked for her to write a book about what that experience cost her. It is Miranda's version of honesty. She knows what she is. She knows what working for her demands of the people around her. And she is, in her strange and indirect and entirely Miranda way, giving Andy permission to tell the truth. The resolution. With Emily's editor-in-chief dreams completely destroyed and Benji's acquisition plan dead, Emily's life falls apart in other ways too. Benji ends their relationship. She loses the powerful position at Dior that had been her professional identity for years. She finds herself at a considerably less prestigious brand, and she has to sit with the consequences of the choice she made in Milan. She eventually reaches out to Andy and they meet for lunch. Emily apologizes for blindsiding her. She admits that Benji broke up with her. And then she says something true, perhaps the most honest thing she has said in the entire film. She tells Andy that she genuinely wants to be friends. Not competitors, not rivals, not two women defined by their complicated shared history with the same terrifying woman. Friends. Andy, who has always understood Emily better than Emily understood herself, reminds her that she is iconic and does not need a man or a magazine title to do something significant with her life. Back in New York, Andy reconciles with Peter. She tells him she wants to be imperfect together, and those words carry the weight of everything she has learned about herself over the course of the film. She does not need to be Miranda Priestly. She does not need to sacrifice everything personal on the altar of professional glory. She can be messy and real and still do meaningful, important work. Peter, warm and patient and entirely unimpressed by the world of fashion, is exactly the right person for the woman Andy has become. Andy returns to runway with a larger office and genuine authority. Her team members Amari, Jean, and Charlie receive promotions that reflect the work they have all done together. And Nigel, in a quiet moment with Andy, finally reveals what she had suspected. He was the one who got her hired back at runway. He sent the video. He made the call. He believed in her when she did not know anyone was watching, and everything that followed began because of that act of quiet loyalty. The film ends with Andy delivering a new article to Miranda. Miranda reads it. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, Miranda Priestly smiles. It is a small smile. It is a brief smile. But it is real. From a woman who never approves of anything, from a woman for whom a whisper carries more weight than most people's shouts, a small real smile is a standing ovation. The heart of the story. At its core, The Devil Wears Prada 2 is a story about what it costs to be ambitious in a world that is always changing and never particularly fair. It is about the women who built institutions through impossible standards and immense personal sacrifice, and what happens to those institutions and those women when the world moves on without them. Miranda's most resonant and human moments in the film involve her genuine fear at the prospect of losing everything she has built. She is not just afraid of losing a job. She is facing the possibility that the thing she gave her entire life to might not survive her, and that she might have given everything for something that will disappear the moment she is no longer standing guard over it. For Andy, the story is about understanding that returning to something is not the same as going backward. She comes back to runway not as an assistant but as a peer. Not to please Miranda but to save something worth saving. Not to lose herself in someone else's vision, but to finally bring her own fully formed identity into a room that once swallowed her whole. She came back knowing who she was. And that made all the difference. Meryl Streep. Mary Louise Streep was born on June 22, 1949, in Summit, New Jersey, into a family that balanced two very different worlds. Her father, Harry William Streep Jr., was a pharmaceutical executive, and her mother, Mary Wolfe Wilkinson, was a commercial artist. She grew up in Bernardsville, New Jersey, alongside her two younger brothers, Dana and Harry, in a comfortable, middle-class American home. Her heritage traces back generations through German, Swiss, Dutch, English, and Irish roots, and the name Streep itself is Dutch in origin, meaning straight line. From a very young age, Meryl displayed a gift for performance, but her earliest ambitions were pointed not toward acting but toward opera. She began voice training at the age of 12 and threw herself into music with the same intensity she would later bring to every role in her career. It was not until she arrived at Vassar College that the focus shifted. She studied drama and costume design there, graduating in 1971, and then went on to Yale School of Drama, where she earned her Master of Fine Arts degree in 1975. Those years at Yale were the crucible in which everything that would make her extraordinary was forged. She was meticulous, obsessive, and possessed of a psychological depth in her approach to character that stunned her instructors. She did not merely learn lines. She built entire human beings from the inside out. After completing her graduate degree, she moved to New York City and immediately entered the professional world of theater. She made her Broadway debut in 1975 in a production called Trelawney of the Wells, and the following year she received a Tony Award nomination for her performance in 27 Wagons Full of Cotton. She also performed in New York Shakespeare Festival productions, in Chekhov plays, and in a range of theatrical work that sharpened her instrument and built her reputation in theater circles as one of the most gifted young actresses anyone had seen in years. The stage was where she learned to inhabit characters completely, to find the truth of a person who was nothing like herself, and to make an audience believe every word she said. Her transition to film was swift and completely assured. She appeared in her first film, Julia, in 1977, and the following year she appeared in The Deer Hunter alongside Robert De Niro and Christopher Walken, earning her first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress. She was not yet 30 years old. Then in 1979 she won her first Oscar for Kramer vs. Kramer, playing a woman who abandons her family and returns to fight for custody of her son, a role that required her to be simultaneously sympathetic and deeply difficult. And in 1982 she won her second Oscar for Sophie's Choice, playing a Polish concentration camp survivor forced to make an agonizing choice between her two children. That performance is still considered one of the greatest in the history of cinema. She spoke with a flawless Polish accent. She lost weight for the role. She gave a performance so technically precise and so emotionally devastating that it set a standard for screen acting that has never been surpassed. Throughout the 1980s she built what can only be described as the most extraordinary consecutive run of acclaimed performances any actor has ever assembled. In Silkwood she played a nuclear industry whistleblower. In Out of Africa she played a Danish woman living and loving in Kenya, earning another Oscar nomination. In Ironweed she played a homeless woman struggling with addiction and loss. In A Cry in the Dark she played Australian mother Lindy Chamberlain in one of the most technically demanding roles imaginable, delivering an accent so precisely rendered that Australian audiences believed she was one of their own. She studied each role from the ground up. She learned the language, the history, the physical life, the psychology. She never arrived on a set unprepared. She arrived knowing more about the character than anyone else in the room. The early 1990s brought a temporary shift in the commercial fortunes of her films, a period that she later acknowledged openly. Hollywood has a brutal habit of losing interest in women once they reach their 40s, and even Meryl Streep was not entirely exempt from that reality. But she was never idle, never less than excellent, and she found her way back into the spotlight with The Bridges of Madison County in 1995, playing an Iowa farm wife who falls into an unexpected love affair with a photographer played by Clint Eastwood. The performance earned her yet another Oscar nomination and reminded the industry that there was simply no one else doing what she did. Then came a second great surge of popularity and commercial success that transformed her public image entirely. The Devil Wears Prada in 2006 introduced her to a new generation of audiences who may not have grown up watching Sophie's Choice or Silkwood. As Miranda Priestly, the terrifying and magnificent editor-in-chief of Runway magazine, she was cold, precise, effortlessly superior, and wickedly funny in a way that required complete seriousness to pull off. She whispered her lines rather than shouting them, and every whisper landed like a thunderclap. The performance is one of the most perfectly controlled pieces of screen acting she has ever given, and it became a cultural landmark. Mamma Mia followed in 2008, in which she sang ABBA songs and displayed the full operatic voice she had been developing since childhood, proving to the world that the greatest dramatic actress of her generation also had perfect comic timing and genuine musical talent. Her award count over her career stands as the most remarkable in Hollywood history. She has received 21 Academy Award nominations, more than any other actor in history, and has won 3 of them, each in a different decade, for different kinds of roles, in entirely different genres. She has won 8 Golden Globe Awards, 3 Emmy Awards, 2 BAFTA Awards, 2 Screen Actors Guild Awards, and has received the AFI Life Achievement Award, the Kennedy Center Honor, the Cecil B. DeMille Award, the Honorary Palme d'Or at Cannes, and an Honorary César from France. No list of awards truly captures what she has meant to the art of acting, but the numbers give some sense of the consistent, relentless, career-long excellence that has defined every decade of her working life. In her personal life, she has been married to sculptor Don Gummer since 1978, a relationship that has lasted nearly 50 years in one of the most demanding and unstable industries in the world. They have 4 children together: Henry, Mary Wills, Grace, and Louisa, and several of her daughters have gone on to pursue their own careers in performance. She has always guarded her family's privacy fiercely, and despite being the most celebrated actress on the planet, she has managed to keep the interior of her personal life genuinely protected from the public eye. She has spoken often about how her commitment to her family shaped her professional choices, and how the desire to be present for her children influenced which roles she took and which she turned down. Anne Hathaway. And Jacqueline Hathaway was born on November 12, 1982, in Brooklyn, New York, into a family that was creative at its very core. Her father, Gerald Hathaway, was a lawyer, but he had once worked as a stagehand, which gave him an intimate understanding of the theater world. Her mother, Kate Macaulay, was a professional stage actress who had toured in Les Miserables, one of the most demanding and celebrated musicals in the world. Growing up watching her mother perform, and developed a love of the stage before she fully understood what the stage meant. She has said that she was interested in acting from the age of 3, and that watching her mother live inside a character night after night was the thing that made her understand what she wanted to do with her life. The family eventually settled in northern New Jersey, and then attended Milburn High School, where she immersed herself in the drama program and made it abundantly clear to everyone around her that this was not a hobby or a phase. She was accepted into the Barrow Group Theatre Company in New York while still a high school student, one of the youngest people ever admitted, and this gave her access to serious professional training before she had even finished school. The discipline and rigor of that training stayed with her throughout her career and gave her a foundation that her later success could be built upon rather than threatened by. She went on to study at New York University's Gallatin School of Individualized Study and later transferred to Vassar College, though her career took off before she could complete her degree. The opportunity that changed everything came in 2001, when she was cast as Mia Thermopolis in The Princess Diaries, a Disney family film directed by Gary Marshall and co-starring the legendary Julie Andrews. The film was a massive commercial success and introduced Hathaway to a global audience as a charming, naturally funny, and instantly lovable presence on screen. She played a shy, awkward teenager who discovers she is the heir to the throne of a small European kingdom, and she did it with such warmth and such genuine comedic instinct that audiences fell completely in love with her. That film could have trapped a less self-aware actress in a permanent box labeled family films and princess roles. And Hathaway was too ambitious and too clear-sighted about her own potential to allow that to happen. She made The Princess Diaries 2 in 2004, honoring the commitment and the audience that had given her her start, but simultaneously she was reaching for something harder and more real. She appeared in Ella Enchanted, a fairy tale comedy, and in a small role in an adaptation of Nicholas Nickleby. And then she made Brokeback Mountain in 2005. Brokeback Mountain, Ang Lee's extraordinary love story about 2 cowboys who fall in love over the course of many years, starred Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal, and Hathaway played the wife of one of them, a woman who carries an enormous amount of unspoken pain and loss across the span of the film. Her role was not large, but what she did with it was significant. Critics noticed a quietness and a depth in her performance that her earlier work had not required her to find. Then came The Devil Wears Prada in 2006, and everything changed permanently. Playing Andy Sachs opposite Meryl Streep and Emily Blunt, Hathaway delivered a performance that demonstrated she could hold her own against the finest actresses working anywhere in the world. She anchored a film in which she was surrounded by louder and more flamboyant characters, and she did it through specificity and emotional honesty rather than through any flashy technique. She was the audience's entry point into the world of Runway magazine, and she made that journey completely real and completely credible. What followed was one of the most deliberately constructed and thoughtfully managed career transformations in modern Hollywood history. Rather than settle into the comfortable territory that her popularity and her likability made available to her, she kept reaching for harder and darker material. In Rachel Getting Married in 2008, she played a recovering drug addict returning home from rehabilitation to attend her sister's wedding. It was raw, unglamorous, and emotionally relentless, and it earned her her first Academy Award nomination. Audiences who had grown up watching her twirl in a ball gown in The Princess Diaries were confronted with something entirely different, and most of them were stunned. She played Catwoman in The Dark Knight Rises in 2012, bringing intelligence and wit to a role that could have been merely decorative, and earning the genuine respect of the action film community. And then she played Fantine in Les Miserables, the same musical her mother had once toured in, and she gave a performance that remains one of the most discussed and emotionally devastating pieces of screen singing in recent memory. She sang live on set, recording her voice in real time rather than lip-syncing to a pre-recorded track, which meant every breath, every break in her voice, every moment of physical and emotional exhaustion in the performance was completely real. She had her hair cut off on camera for the role. She lost significant weight for it. And she won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. In her personal life, and went through a very painful and very public experience when her former boyfriend, Italian real estate developer Raffaello Foglieri, was arrested in 2008 on federal charges of fraud and money laundering. She had known nothing of his criminal activities, and the investigation confirmed she was not implicated in any way. But the public scrutiny was intense and at times brutal, and she navigated it with a composure and dignity that said a great deal about her character. She later met actor and jewelry designer Adam Schulman, and they were married in 2012 in a small, private ceremony in Big Sur, California. They have 2 sons together, and she has spoken warmly and openly about the grounding influence her family has had on her life. She has been a vocal and consistent advocate for LGBTQ rights throughout her career, and the origins of that advocacy are personal. When she learned that her brother was gay, she made the decision to leave the Catholic Church she had been raised in because she was unwilling to belong to an institution that did not fully embrace him. She has never been quiet about her support, and she has used her platform consistently over the years to speak about issues she believes in rather than staying safely silent. Her return to the role of Andy Sachs in The Devil Wears Prada 2 in 2026 brought her full circle to the film that first established her as a serious dramatic presence and reminded the world, 20 years later, that the girl who once cowered in Miranda Priestly's shadow had grown into someone who could stand in that room as an equal. Emily Blunt. Emily Olivia Laura Blunt was born on February 23, 1983, in London, England, in the southwest neighborhood of Roehampton. She came into the world as the second of 4 children in a family that was both intellectually rigorous and creatively inclined. Her father, Oliver Blunt, was a Queen's Counsel barrister, one of the most distinguished positions in the British legal profession. Her mother, Joanna Mackey, had been an actress and had worked as a teacher. The combination of those 2 influences, the precision and discipline of the law and the imagination and empathy of the stage, ran through all 4 of the Blunt children and shaped them in different, but equally distinctive ways. Emily's early childhood was marked by a challenge that would have defined most people's lives had they not found a way through it. As a young girl, she suffered from a severe stutter that made communication genuinely painful. In social situations, at school, in any context that required her to speak in front of others, she would freeze. The stutter was not a minor inconvenience. It was a real and serious impediment that caused her significant anxiety and embarrassment. A teacher at her school, recognizing her sensitivity and her creativity, suggested she try acting. The idea was that stepping into a character other than herself might free her from the psychological grip of the stutter, that perhaps the condition was tied to being Emily Blunt specifically, and that becoming someone else, even temporarily, might allow her to speak freely. It worked. When she stood on a stage and inhabited a character, the stutter largely disappeared. She has spoken about this experience with tremendous honesty throughout her career, and she has been a board member and advocate for the American Institute for Stuttering for many years, using her story to give courage to other people who are living with the same condition. She attended Hurtwood House, a boarding school in Surrey that was well known for its performing arts program, and it was there that she really developed the skills and the confidence that would launch her professional career. She performed the role of Juliet in a production that was taken to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and her performance there caught the attention of a theatrical agent who recognized immediately that he was looking at something unusual. He signed her, and within a very short time she was moving from Edinburgh to the West End. In 2001, at just 18 years old, she appeared in a West End production of The Royal Family directed by Sir Peter Hall, playing Gwen Cavendish opposite the legendary Dame Judi Dench. To be on stage opposite Judi Dench at 18, in a production of that caliber, directed by one of the greatest theatre directors in British history, is not merely a promising debut. It is an announcement. The Evening Standard, one of London's most influential newspapers, gave her their Best Newcomer award for the performance, and the British theatrical world sat up and took notice. She continued building her stage career with productions of Romeo and Juliet at the Chichester Festival in 2002, and with various other West End productions that deepened her craft and extended her range. She made her television debut in a British TV film called Boudica in 2003, playing a supporting role that gave her her first experience in front of a camera. Her film debut came in 2004 with My Summer of Love, a quiet and beautifully made British film in which she played Tamsin, a manipulative and dangerously charming young woman who draws a lonely girl from a very different world into her orbit. The performance was magnetic. She was 21 years old and she acted with the precision and psychological intelligence of someone who had been doing this for decades. Critics took notice. Directors started calling. The year 2006 was the year that changed everything. In the television film Gideon's Daughter she played a complex and deeply emotional role opposite Bill Nighy, and the performance won her a Golden Globe Award for Best Supporting Actress in a Television Film. In the same year, she played Emily Charlton, the exquisitely caustic and fiercely loyal first assistant to Miranda Priestly, in The Devil Wears Prada. The two roles together, one a delicate dramatic achievement, and one a masterclass in dry comedic precision, demonstrated a range that was almost unheard of in an actress of her age and experience. She stole scenes from Meryl Streep and Anne Hathaway, which is not something many people manage to do, and she did it by being so fully committed to every sarcastic syllable that Emily Charlton became as iconic as the film itself. What followed was a career defined by relentless diversification and a refusal to be placed in any single box. She played Queen Victoria in The Young Victoria in 2009, a role that required her to portray a young woman learning how to wield power and authority in a world determined to undermine her, and she did it with such dignity and such careful intelligence that critics called it one of the finest historical portrayals in years. She voiced an animated character in Romeo and Juliet in 2011. She played a hardened, emotionally complex law enforcement agent in the terrifying Denis Villeneuve drug cartel thriller Sicario in 2015. She played the baker's wife in the film adaptation of the Stephen Sondheim musical Into the Woods in 2014, demonstrating once again that she could sing, that the voice was real and trained and capable of holding its own in a cast full of musical theater performers. She played a survivalist mother in the horror film A Quiet Place in 2018, a film directed by her husband John Krasinski, in which almost the entire performance was conducted in silence, and she was devastating in it. She took on the mantle of Mary Poppins in Mary Poppins Returns in 2018. A role that came with enormous cultural weight and expectation, and she made it entirely her own. In Oppenheimer in 2023, Christopher Nolan's epic biographical film about the creation of the atomic bomb, she played Catherine Oppenheimer, the scientist's wife, and earned her first Academy Award nomination. Her personal life is, by Hollywood standards, unusually warm and stable. She met actor and filmmaker John Krasinski, best known at that time for his role as Jim Halpert in the American version of The Office, at a dinner party in Los Angeles. The two began dating, and they were married in July 2010 in a ceremony held at a castle on Lake Como in Italy that was owned by George Clooney. They have two daughters, Hazel, born in 2014, and Violet, born in 2016, and the family maintains a relatively private life in which the children are kept away from the kind of media exposure that comes naturally with two parents of such significant fame. She has spoken often about family being her absolute first priority, and in 2023 she took a temporary break from acting specifically to spend more time with her daughters. And then there is the remarkable family connection that ties the cast of The Devil Wears Prada 2 together in ways that feel almost too good to be true. Stanley Tucci, who plays Nigel in both films, is married to Emily's sister, Felicity Blunt. Which means that Emily Blunt and Stanley Tucci, who play colleagues at Runway magazine across two films spanning 20 years, are actually brother and sister-in-law. They spend holidays together. They are genuinely family. The warmth and the ease and the natural chemistry between them on screen has a very literal and very real explanation. Stanley Tucci. Stanley Tucci was born on November 11, 1960, in Peekskill, New York, and grew up in Catania, a small hamlet roughly 45 miles north of New York City. His family was Italian-American, with roots in the Calabria region of southern Italy, and the culture, language, and food of that heritage were central to the way the household was run. His father, Stanley Tucci Sr., was an art teacher, and his mother, Joan Tropiano Tucci, was a secretary and a writer. Both of his parents had roots in the small Italian town of Marzi in Calabria, and the family's Italian identity was not merely a background fact. It was a living, breathing part of daily life, expressed through food, through language, through a particular way of understanding the world. He was the eldest of 3 children, with 2 younger sisters, Christine, who also became an actress, and Gina, who became an artist. The household produced creative people almost as a matter of course, because creativity was not treated as something unusual or peripheral. It was treated as a natural part of what educated, curious, engaged people did with their lives. His cousin Joseph Tropiano became a screenwriter and later collaborated with Stanley on several projects, and the sense that the family was a creative community rather than simply a domestic unit ran through his entire upbringing. In the early 1970s, when Stanley was around 12 years old, his father took a sabbatical from teaching in order to study art in Italy, and the whole family moved to Florence for a year. The experience of living in Italy at that age, of walking through streets lined with Renaissance art, of eating the food, of learning the language, of absorbing the culture not as a tourist but as someone actually living inside it, was transformative in ways that would shape everything that came after. He became fluent in Italian. He developed a love of Italian food and cooking that went far beyond mere appreciation and became something closer to a devotion. He learned that food is not simply sustenance. It is history, memory, love, and identity pressed into a meal. He attended John Jay High School back in New York after the family returned, and it was there that he discovered acting. He went on to the State University of New York's Conservatory of Theater Arts in Purchase, where he earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Acting in 1982. He graduated with the skills, the discipline, and the hunger of someone who had spent 4 years doing nothing but working on his craft, and he went immediately into the professional world. His Broadway debut came in 1982, immediately after graduating, when his friend Campbell Scott arranged for both of them to appear in small roles as soldiers in a play called The Queen and the Rebels, which starred the legendary actress Colleen Dewhurst. The role earned him his Actors' Equity Card, the formal credential that allowed him to work professionally in theater, and he spent the next few years building his reputation on the stage. He made his film debut in 1985 in John Huston's crime comedy Prizzi's Honor, starring Jack Nicholson and Kathleen Turner. His role was small, but it opened the door to the film world, and he began moving between stage, television, and film with the fluid ease of someone who was equally at home in all three. Throughout the late 1980s and the 1990s he worked consistently and built a reputation as one of the finest character actors in the business. He appeared in television series including Miami Vice, Crime Story, and The Equalizer. He took supporting roles in films of various genres, always bringing more to each part than the role strictly required, always finding the human detail that made a character memorable even when the character only appeared on screen for a few minutes. Directors who worked with him repeatedly described the same experience. The film was better because Stanley Tucci was in it, even when he was not the lead, even when he was not the star. He co-wrote, co-directed, and starred in Big Night in 1996, a film about two Italian brothers running a failing restaurant in 1950s New Jersey who stake everything on one extraordinary meal. The film is a love letter to Italian food, to the immigrant experience, and to the painful gap between artistic integrity and commercial survival. It has since become a genuine cult classic, beloved by food lovers and film lovers in equal measure, and it demonstrated that Tucci was not merely a performer but a complete filmmaker with a distinctive, deeply personal artistic voice. He was not just playing characters who loved food. He was making art about why food matters. The 2000s brought him to a much wider mainstream audience. His portrayal of Nigel in The Devil Wears Prada in 2006, the witty and emotionally intelligent art director of Runway magazine who serves as both confidant and comic relief, was one of the warmest and most beloved performances in the film, and it introduced him to audiences who would follow his career for the rest of his life. He followed it with a stunning turn in The Lovely Bones in 2009, in which he played a suburban child murderer of such particular and precise malevolence that the performance was genuinely terrifying. The contrast between the warmth of Nigel and the darkness of that character illustrated the full scope of what he was capable of, and he received Academy Award, BAFTA, and Golden Globe nominations for the role. He appeared in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, playing Dr. Abraham Erskine, the scientist who creates the super soldier serum, in Captain America, the First Avenger in 2011. He played Flavius in the Hunger Games franchise beginning in 2012, a role that required him to disappear beneath elaborate costumes and makeup and find a fully realized human being inside them. He played the villain in Michael Bay's Transformers: Age of Extinction in 2014. He demonstrated, film after film, that there was no genre he could not operate in, and no kind of role he could not make interesting. His personal life carried real grief as well as real joy. He married Catherine Spath in 1995, and together they had 3 children, including twins. Their marriage lasted 14 years, until 2009, when Catherine lost her battle with breast cancer. Her death was devastating to him, and he has spoken about the experience of losing his wife to that disease with an honesty and an openness that has connected deeply with audiences around the world. He became involved in cancer research advocacy in the aftermath of her death, using his public profile to support the causes she fought for, and that took her from him. He later found love again with Felicity Blunt, the sister of his Devil Wears Prada co-star Emily Blunt, and they married in 2012. Together they have 2 children. He has also published a memoir about his relationship with food, his Italian heritage, and his life, which became a bestseller, and he has hosted 2 enormously popular television travel and food series, Stanley Tucci, Searching for Italy, and Tucci in Italy, in which he travels through the regions of Italy exploring the food, the culture, and the stories of the people. The series made him one of the most beloved television personalities in the world and introduced him to an entirely new generation of fans who fell in love with him not for any specific performance, but for the person he is: warm, funny, curious, knowledgeable, and completely at ease in the world. He came back to Nigel in The Devil Wears Prada 2 in 2026, 20 years after first playing the role, and reminded the world that the man who makes Italy look like paradise, and the man who can play a child murderer with terrifying precision, and the man who stands in the offices of Runway magazine dispensing wisdom and wit with perfect timing are all the same person. One of the most versatile and most genuinely beloved actors of his generation. The budget. How much did this movie cost, and where did the money go? The Devil Wears Prada 2 was made on a reported production budget of $100 million. To put that number into perspective, the original 2006 film cost approximately $35 million to make. That means the sequel cost almost 3 times what the first film cost, and every single one of those additional dollars has a very clear explanation when you look at what was actually put on screen and what was required to make this production happen. The biggest single factor driving the budget upward was the cast. When you are assembling for Academy Award caliber performers, all of whom are at the peak of their powers and all of whom have decades of career success behind them, you are not paying 2006 salaries. Meryl Streep, a 3-time Oscar winner and arguably the most acclaimed actress in the history of cinema, came back to this role after 20 years of even more extraordinary work. Anne Hathaway, who was a rising star in 2006, is now an Oscar winner herself with a global box office track record that spans everything from massive blockbusters to prestige dramas. Emily Blunt, who was virtually unknown when she first played Emily Charlton, is now one of the highest-paid actresses in the world, with an Oscar nomination from Oppenheimer and franchises like A Quiet Place to her name. Stanley Tucci, who has become a global television personality on top of his film career, commands a very different fee than he did 20 years ago. All 4 of them returning together, with new additions like Kenneth Branagh and Lucy Liu and Justin Theroux, represents a payroll that belongs in a completely different financial category than the original. The second major cost driver was the wardrobe. This is a film built entirely on fashion, and the costume department had an obligation to deliver something worthy of Miranda Priestly in 2026. Meryl Streep's wardrobe as Miranda in this film features pieces from Chanel, Balenciaga, Schiaparelli, Dries Van Noten, Armani Prive, Valentino, Dolce & Gabbana, and a custom-made Balenciaga red silk gown that was created specifically for the film. Anne Hathaway's wardrobe as the newly fashionable Andy features pieces from Kite, Sacai, Gabriella Hearst, and a range of luxury accessories. Every single outfit worn by every speaking character in this film was carefully chosen, often custom-made, and represents the kind of investment that the fashion world expects from a sequel to the most beloved fashion film ever made. The wardrobe budget alone for a production of this kind runs into the millions. The third major element was the locations. Filming took place across New York City, Newark, New Jersey, and Milan, Italy. The New York shoot included filming inside the Dior boutique on 57th Street and Madison Avenue, inside the lobby of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, inside Marc Jacobs' actual fitting rooms, inside the newly developed Hudson Yards space, and at the same townhouse used as Miranda's home in the original. Each of these locations required permits, negotiation, security, and production infrastructure. The Milan shoot during Fashion Week meant the entire cast and crew were in one of the most expensive cities in the world during one of the most expensive weeks of the fashion calendar. The production was given access to film at Dolce & Gabbana's actual Milan Fashion Week show, which required a level of coordination and cost that goes well beyond a typical location shoot. The marketing campaign on top of the production budget was reportedly one of the largest promotional efforts ever undertaken by Disney. The Hollywood Reporter estimated the campaign's total promotional value at $250 million, supported by brand partnerships with Dior, Google, Coca-Cola, Grey Goose, Mercedes-Benz, L'Oreal, Zillow, TRE-Semi, and United Airlines. Many of these were partnership deals rather than direct costs, but they represent the scale of commercial machinery that Disney built around this film's release. The working title during the casting process was Cerulean, a direct reference to the most famous speech in the original film, the one in which Miranda explains to Andy that the cerulean color of her lumpy blue sweater began with a fashion decision made in that very office years earlier. Using that title internally was not just a clever inside reference. It was a signal to everyone involved that the people making this film understood exactly what the original meant to its audience, and intended to honor it completely. The film was originally scheduled to open on the same date as Marvel's Avengers: Doomsday. Disney moved Avengers to a different date, and gave The Devil Wears Prada to the May 1, 2026 slot instead, which tells you everything you need to know about how much confidence the studio had in this movie. They looked at a fashion comedy drama with no superheroes and no special effects, and decided it was a bigger commercial opportunity than one of the most anticipated Marvel films in years. Against its $100 million budget, the film has grossed $433 million worldwide, making it a genuine financial success and cementing its status as one of the most profitable non-superhero films of 2026. Funny moments and behind-the-scenes stories. Now let us get into the part that everyone loves, the behind-the-scenes stories, the funny moments, and the chaotic human reality of making a film of this scale in the middle of New York City with one of the most famous casts ever assembled. The production began on June 30, 2025, and the streets of New York City essentially became a public event the moment cameras started rolling. Fans, photographers, and media crews descended on every single location the moment word got out about where filming was taking place. Emily Blunt described the entire experience in an interview by saying it was overwhelming in a good way and that she had never experienced a movie being shot with this much attention around it. The crew would arrive at a location, and by the time they were set up, enormous crowds had gathered on the sidewalks outside. The cast of The Devil Wears Prada 2 could not film a single scene in New York without it becoming a public spectacle, which on one hand was a reminder of how beloved these characters are, and on the other hand made getting actual work done considerably more complicated than usual. One of the most talked about funny moments from the promotional tour came from Anne Hathaway during her appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. When asked about her co-stars, she pointed directly at Stanley Tucci and called him the real diva on set. She said that Stanley was incredibly fussy about his clothes, to which the audience roared with laughter. She then took it a step further and complained that despite the fact that Stanley Tucci is a world-famous cook who hosts a hugely popular television series about Italian food, and despite the fact that she worked with him every single day on set, he had not once cooked a single thing for her. She looked directly at the camera and said, in front of a live studio audience and millions of television viewers, that Stanley Tucci had not made her a morsel. Colbert was completely unable to keep a straight face. Hathaway delivered the line with the perfect combination of mock outrage and genuine affection that made it one of the funniest interview moments of the entire promotional campaign. Stanley Tucci, never one to let a joke go unanswered, responded to this accusation the following day in his own interview. He pointed out that given the number of times he had been made to wear tight clothes on set, he felt it was perhaps best for everyone concerned that he was not cooking enormous Italian meals for the cast and crew every evening. The exchange between Hathaway and Tucci across two separate interviews gave the impression of two people who have spent enough time together to develop the comic timing of a long-running double act, and the internet found the whole thing completely delightful. Emily Blunt had her own funny moment during the promotional period when an interviewer at a red carpet event casually referred to the film as The Prada rather than using its full title. Blunt stopped mid-answer, visibly thrown, and asked the interviewer if the film was now just called The Prada. She repeated it back as a question with an expression of genuine disbelief, and then burst out laughing. She confirmed that she did not have an opinion on the shortened nickname, and then continued talking about how surprised she was by the enormous reaction to the teaser trailer. She told the interviewer that none of them had expected the whirlwind around it, and described the response as awesome. The clip of that moment circulated widely online, partly because of how naturally funny Blunt is in unscripted situations. When the first teaser trailer dropped in November 2025, it showed just one scene. Meryl Streep as Miranda Priestly, wearing her signature silver hair and commanding stride, walks into an elevator. The doors are about to close. Anne Hathaway's Andy slides in at the last second and says Miranda's name in greeting. And Meryl Streep, without so much as turning her head, delivers the line, "Took you long enough." The clip ended there. That single line, 5 words from Meryl Streep in a 30-second clip, generated 181.5 million views in its first 24 hours. The internet lost its collective mind. Memes, reaction videos, and commentary flooded social media for days. The fans had been waiting 20 years for exactly that energy, and Streep delivered it in 5 words. The full trailer released in February 2026 included a preview of the original song Runway performed by Lady Gaga and Doechii, and the combination of the visuals, the music, and the sight of all 4 original cast members together again generated 222 million views in 24 hours, making it the most watched trailer in 20th Century Studios history. The studio had not seen anything quite like the response to this campaign, and by the time the film opened in theaters, the level of public anticipation was genuinely comparable to major blockbuster franchise releases. During filming in Central Park in August 2025, Anne Hathaway and Stanley Tucci were photographed walking together between takes, both in full costume, looking completely at ease and apparently chatting and laughing with each other as the cameras captured them from a distance. The images went viral immediately, not because anything particularly dramatic was happening, but simply because seeing these two people together and these characters again, 20 years later and clearly enjoying each other's company, hit audiences in a place that was not entirely rational. People had feelings about it. Very strong feelings. The images circulated for days. One of the more unexpected details that emerged from the production involved Meryl Streep's hair. Observant audiences who saw the film noticed that Miranda's famous silver hair looked slightly different in this film compared to the original, specifically a bit thinner, and they were correct. The production made a deliberate choice to reflect the realistic passage of 20 years on the character's appearance rather than attempting to make everything look exactly as it did in 2006. Miranda Priestly in this film is a woman in her 70s who has been running one of the most demanding institutions in the world for decades. The decision to let that show in small ways was both an artistic choice and a statement about authenticity, and it was noticed and appreciated by audiences who paid close attention. Meryl Streep's wardrobe during the promotional tour for the film became its own cultural event. Her stylist described their approach as meta-dressing, meaning they were not trying to recreate a Miranda Priestly costume on the red carpet, but instead honoring the character's spirit through choices that reflected who Streep herself is as an accomplished woman at the absolute height of her career. At the world premiere in New York, she wore a dramatic red leather cape gown by Sarah Burton for Givenchy. In Shanghai, she wore a deep blue Saint Laurent suit. She wore a tiger print Gucci faux fur as a nod to the urban jungle photoshoot from the first film. At one premiere, she pinned her own actual awards to her suit, including the National Medal of Arts and her French Ordre d'Arts et de Lettres, which is the French government's highest cultural honor. The combination of self-reference, fashion history, and personal achievement made every single red carpet appearance a story in itself. Meryl Streep herself, in a New York Times interview during the promotional run, spoke about her co-stars in the way that only someone who has genuinely fallen in love with a group of people over the course of 20 years can speak. She said that in the time between the two films, all of their professional lives had blossomed in extraordinary ways. And then she said of Stanley Tucci, in her characteristic dry and completely affectionate way, that they were close friends now and that all that time had passed and she simply could not get rid of him. It is the kind of comment that made everyone who read it immediately understand everything there is to understand about their friendship. Anne Hathaway, in a separate interview, spoke about her co-stars with a warmth that was entirely unguarded. She described Emily Blunt as a dream of a human being. She described Stanley Tucci as so funny and so quick. And about Meryl Streep she said something that was both deeply honest and deeply moving. She said that she did not tell Miranda how much she revered her to her face. She kept it internally. But that Streep was someone she admired above almost anyone in her professional world, and that working alongside her again after 20 years was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. The film, the production, the cast relationships, the marketing campaign, the trailers, the on-set chaos, the red carpet fashion, and the interviews all added up to something that felt, for a brief period in the spring of 2026, like one of those rare moments when a film genuinely captures a cultural mood and reminds an entire generation why they fell in love with certain stories and certain characters in the first place. The Devil Wears Prada 2 was not just a movie. It was an event. And from the very first teaser trailer, from the moment Meryl Streep looked at the closing elevator doors and said "took you long enough," everyone knew it. Here is the complete, clean cultural and historical details of this movie. No resources, no citations, pure content. The Devil Wears Prada 2, Cultural and Historical Details. To truly understand what The Devil Wears Prada 2 means as a cultural event, you cannot simply look at the film in isolation. You have to go back. You have to understand where this story came from, what the world looked like when it first appeared, and how dramatically everything has changed in the 20 years between the first film and the second. Because this sequel is not just a movie. It is a document of a world in the process of transforming itself, and the story it tells on screen mirrors something that has been happening in real life for 2 decades in the fashion industry, in journalism, in media, and in the way power itself is understood and exercised. Where it all began, the real story behind the story. The origin of The Devil Wears Prada goes back to 1999, when a young woman named Lauren Weisberger took a job as a personal assistant to Anna Wintour, the editor-in-chief of Vogue magazine. Wintour is one of the most powerful and most feared figures in the history of fashion. She took over Vogue in 1988, and transformed it into the most influential fashion publication in the world. She is known for her signature blunt bob haircut, her constant oversized sunglasses, her front-row presence at every major fashion show, and her absolute, unchallenged authority over what was considered beautiful, relevant, and worth attention in the fashion world. Weisberger, who had hoped for a writing career, found herself instead functioning as a human extension of Wintour herself, fetching coffee, managing schedules, and navigating the impossible demands of one of the most demanding bosses in any industry anywhere. She lasted 1 year. When she left, she enrolled in a creative writing course, and her teacher suggested she write about what she knew. What she knew was that year at Vogue. In February 2003, The Devil Wears Prada was published as a novel. It had a first print run of 100,000 copies. It became a bestseller almost immediately. The novel was a barely disguised account of Weisberger's time working for Wintour. The fictional magazine runway was Vogue. The fictional tyrant Miranda Priestly was Anna Wintour. Wintour herself, when told by a colleague that her former assistant was publishing a novel based on their time together, reportedly said she could not remember who that girl was. It was a response so perfectly Miranda Priestly in its dismissive cruelty that it almost seemed too perfect to be real, and yet it was entirely consistent with everything the novel described. Wintour's official position was that she found it all very entertaining fiction and that she was not particularly interested in it one way or another. In 2006, the novel was adapted into a film. During production, something remarkable happened. Anna Wintour was so intimidating and so powerful that many of the major luxury fashion brands were afraid to participate in the film. They feared that if they appeared in a movie that was essentially a satire of Wintour and the world she ruled, they would lose access to Vogue forever. Meryl Streep herself later said in an interview that the entire fashion industry was afraid of Anna on the first film, and as a result, the production struggled to find clothes. Only one major designer, Valentino Garavani, was willing to appear as himself. The fear was real. It was concrete. And it illustrated better than any scene in the film possibly could the actual, tangible, commercial power that Anna Wintour held over the fashion world in 2006. The film was released in June 2006. It made over $300 million worldwide. It earned Meryl Streep an Academy Award nomination. It earned costume designer Patricia Field an Academy Award nomination. It became a cultural phenomenon that entered the language immediately and permanently. Lines from the film became part of everyday speech. The cerulean speech became perhaps the most quoted film monologue about the fashion industry ever put on screen. Miranda Priestly became one of the most iconic characters in the history of cinema. And somewhere in New York, Anna Wintour, who had predicted the film would go straight to DVD, watched it earn over $300 million worldwide and quietly began reassessing her position. The 2006 moment, what the first film captured. To understand the cultural significance of the sequel, you need to understand what the world looked like in 2006 when the original film was released. This requires a brief history lesson, because the world of 2006 and the world of 2026 are separated by a transformation in media and fashion that is genuinely one of the most dramatic and consequential shifts in the history of both industries. In 2006, glossy print magazines still ruled the cultural landscape. Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Elle, and a handful of other publications were the undisputed arbiters of what was fashionable, what was beautiful, and what mattered in the world of style. Editors like Anna Wintour held what can only be described as quasi-governmental authority over the fashion industry. A positive review in Vogue could make a designer's career. A cold shoulder from Anna Wintour could end one. The front row at a fashion show was a precise hierarchy that communicated status as clearly as a royal seating chart. Advertisers poured money into these publications because there was simply no equivalent alternative for reaching the affluent, fashion-conscious audience that luxury brands needed to reach. The Internet existed in 2006. Social media was just beginning to take shape. Facebook had launched 2 years earlier. Twitter would not launch until that same year. Instagram was still 4 years away. The idea that a teenager with a phone could influence fashion trends at the same scale as a Vogue editor was not just unlikely. It was unthinkable. The system was hierarchical, exclusive, top-down, and essentially unchanged in its fundamental structure from the way it had operated for decades. Miranda Priestly's power in the original film was not exaggerated for comic effect. It was an accurate portrait of how the fashion world actually worked. The film also arrived at what would later be recognized as the final moment of that era. The 2006 release squeezed in just before the 2008 financial crisis, which devastated the magazine industry along with everything else. Condé Nast, the publishing giant that owns Vogue and many other major titles, never fully recovered from that recession. Print advertising revenues began their long, accelerating decline. Circulation numbers fell. Magazine titles folded. The staff of major publications shrank. The world that The Devil Wears Prada lovingly and savagely portrayed began to erode almost immediately after the film appeared on screen. 20 years of transformation. What happened between the two films? The 20 years between The Devil Wears Prada and its sequel witnessed one of the most complete and radical transformations of an industry in modern history. Understanding that transformation is understanding what the sequel is really about. The rise of social media changed everything. Instagram, which launched in 2010, created a new class of fashion authority figures who owed nothing to the traditional publishing establishment. Influencers, bloggers, and content creators built audiences of millions without ever appearing in the pages of Vogue. The front row at fashion shows began to be occupied not just by editors and celebrities but by people whose entire authority came from their Instagram follower count. The gate was no longer kept by a handful of powerful editors. The gate had been torn down. Anyone with a phone, an eye for aesthetics, and a following had access to the conversation. Fast fashion accelerated to a pace that would have been unimaginable in 2006. The trickle-down system that Miranda Priestly described so precisely in her cerulean speech, the process by which a designer decision made in a fashion show eventually makes its way down through the retail chain and into stores accessible to ordinary people, had been compressed from years into weeks, and then into days. Online retailers began copying runway looks so quickly that duplicates sometimes reached consumers before the original designs were even available for purchase. The fashion industry was producing more clothing more cheaply and more quickly than ever before in history, and simultaneously losing the kind of cultural authority that had once made fashion feel like something elevated and important. Print journalism entered a state of permanent crisis. Publication after publication shrank its staff, reduced its print frequency, or closed entirely. The journalists who had devoted their careers to writing long-form features for major magazines suddenly found themselves sending out CVs or starting newsletters or pivoting to digital formats that paid a fraction of what their print careers had. The layoff by text message that opens The Devil Wears Prada 2 is not a dramatic device. It is a scene that countless real journalists recognized immediately because it had happened to them, or to someone they knew, or to entire newsrooms they had been part of. The film opens in that pain deliberately, because that pain is real. Luxury fashion brands, which had once feared the wrath of Anna Wintour and stayed away from the first Devil Wears Prada film to protect their relationships with Vogue, were by 2025 falling over each other to be associated with the sequel. The calculation had completely reversed. Being in The Devil Wears Prada 2 was not a risk. It was a marketing opportunity. The cultural power that Vogue and its editor had once held so absolutely had dispersed into the wider culture, and brands now sought association with the film rather than protection from it. Dior partnered with the production. Marc Jacobs let the crew into his fitting rooms. Dolce & Gabbana provided access to their Milan Fashion Week show as a filming location. Donatella Versace filmed the cameo. The fashion world's relationship to this story had been inverted completely. The Anna Wintour transformation, a story in itself. One of the most remarkable cultural stories surrounding The Devil Wears Prada 2 is what happened to Anna Wintour herself across the 20 years between the two films. Her journey from refusing to engage with the original to appearing on the cover of Vogue with Meryl Streep to promote the sequel is one of the most fascinating examples of personal brand evolution in the history of celebrity culture. When the original film was released in 2006, Wintour's official position was carefully managed distance. She attended the premiere wearing Prada, which was generally understood as both a nod to the film's title and a statement of her own authority over what she chose to wear and when. She praised the film in general terms when pressed. She made clear that she found the question of whether Miranda Priestly was based on her to be beneath serious engagement. Her power in 2006 was the power of someone who did not need to participate in the cultural conversation about themselves because the cultural conversation would happen around them regardless. By 2026, everything had changed. Wintour, who had stepped back from the day-to-day editor-in-chief role at Vogue to become its global editorial director, appeared on the May 2026 cover of Vogue alongside Meryl Streep. The two women posed together, Miranda Priestly and Anna Wintour, the fictional character and her real-world inspiration, side by side on the cover of the most famous fashion magazine in the world. It was one of the most audacious and self-aware pieces of media marketing in recent memory. Greta Gerwig, the acclaimed filmmaker, sat down with both women for the cover story interview, in which they discussed power, fashion, acting, and the passage of 20 years. In that interview, Wintour said that she would like to say it was such an honor to be played by Meryl, however distant Miranda was from herself. The line was delivered with enough self-awareness to suggest that she was perfectly aware of the game being played and perfectly happy to play it. She also addressed the changes in her industry directly, saying that so much had changed but that she preferred to think of it as evolving rather than disintegrating, and that Vogue was still present, and reaching far more people across far more platforms than it ever had through print alone. The irony was unmissable. The editor of a magazine that had once held a position so untouchable that luxury brands feared association with a film about it was now actively promoting herself through that same film in order to stay relevant. When the first film was in production, Winter had reportedly pressured prominent fashion figures not to appear in it, warning that doing so might affect their coverage in Vogue. By the time the sequel was in production, Winter went to the world premiere at Lincoln Center and embraced the occasion publicly. This shift illustrated something about the way power had changed over 20 years. In 2006, power was the ability to make people afraid. In 2026, power required participation. It required visibility. It required the willingness to be known and seen and spoken about, because silence and mystery no longer conveyed authority. They conveyed irrelevance. The themes the film explores, why it matters beyond fashion. The Devil Wears Prada 2 engages with a set of themes that extend far beyond the world of fashion magazines and designer clothes, and this is what gives the film its lasting cultural resonance. The film is fundamentally about institutional decline, about what happens to the people and the organizations that were built to serve a world that no longer exists in the same form. Runway magazine in this film is fighting for its life not because it has done anything wrong but because the world changed around it. The same is true of countless real institutions in journalism, publishing, music, retail, and dozens of other industries that were built during an era of relative stability and now find themselves navigating a landscape that rewards speed, adaptability, and digital fluency above all else. Miranda Priestly's crisis is not a personal failure. It is the story of someone who is genuinely exceptional at operating within a system that is no longer operating in the way it was designed. That story resonates because it is happening everywhere simultaneously. The film is also about the collapse of journalism and what it means for democracy and for public life when the institutions that held power accountable are themselves financially unsustainable. Andy Sachs in this film is not just a fashion journalist. She is a figure for all the journalists who have watched their newsrooms shrink and their careers become precarious not because of any failure of skill or integrity, but because the business model that funded their work simply broke. The scene in which an entire newsroom is laid off by text message is played for comedy, but it is comedy that stings because it is true. Entire newsrooms have been laid off exactly this way. The people watching that scene in cinemas were laughing at something they had lived through. The film examines the way power operates differently in an era of digital transparency. In 2006, Miranda Priestly's power came from her position, from the institutional authority of Runway, from the fear she inspired, and from the exclusivity of access to the world she controlled. In 2026, that kind of power is less stable. Institutions can be disrupted overnight. Exclusive access can be circumvented through social media. Fear is a less reliable instrument of authority in a world where employees can post about working conditions anonymously, and where public accountability operates in real time. The film recognizes this shift and makes it the engine of its plot. The film also engages with the theme of women and power in ways that are specific to this historical moment. Miranda Priestly is a woman in her 70s who has spent decades maintaining her position at the top of an industry through a combination of genuine talent, relentless work, and the kind of psychological intimidation that the film has always framed as both impressive and troubling. The sequel asks what happens to such a woman when the rules change, when the qualities that made her exceptional in one era become liabilities in another, when the world decides that its institutions need to look different and operate differently. It is a question with no clean answer, and the film is wise enough not to provide one. The fashion industry in 2026, what the film reflects. The fashion world that The Devil Wears Prada 2 depicts is genuinely different from the one shown in the original, and that difference is historically accurate. The major fashion houses that once operated as independent creative empires are now largely owned by two enormous luxury conglomerates. LVMH, which owns Louis Vuitton, Christian Dior, Celine, Givenchy, and dozens of other brands, and Kering, which owns Gucci, Saint Laurent, Bottega Veneta, and others, have fundamentally changed the way high fashion operates. These conglomerates require their brands to produce increasing sales season after season, which creates pressure for commercial consistency that can work against the kind of radical creative risk-taking that has historically defined great fashion. Trends now move faster than any editor or publication can track. Social media has accelerated the fashion cycle to a point where a trend can emerge, peak, and be declared over within a matter of months. The concept of seasonal fashion, the idea that there are distinct spring, summer, and autumn-winter collections that define what is stylish for a given period, has been supplemented by a continuous flow of micro-trends driven by algorithm and influencer culture. The fashion industry produces more clothing than it ever has in history, and more of it ends up unsold or discarded than ever before. The cerulean speech from the original film, in which Miranda explains how a designer's color choice eventually makes its way from the runway to a discount sweater, described a trickle-down process that took years. In 2026, that process takes weeks. Fast fashion brands have sophisticated systems for copying runway looks so quickly that their versions sometimes reach consumers before the luxury originals are available for purchase. The democratization of fashion that technology and social media have enabled has real benefits for ordinary consumers, but it has also stripped away some of the mystery and authority that once made fashion feel like something more than commerce. The marketing as cultural event. One of the most culturally significant aspects of The Devil Wears Prada 2 was the way its marketing campaign itself became a cultural event rather than merely a commercial exercise. The decision to release the first teaser trailer in November 2025 showing only one scene, Meryl Streep as Miranda walking into an elevator and delivering 5 words to Anne Hathaway, was a masterclass in understanding what an audience wanted and giving it to them in the most concentrated possible form. The 181.5 million views that teaser generated in its first 24 hours were not the result of advertising spend alone. They were the result of 20 years of cultural attachment to these characters and this story, released all at once when the elevator doors opened. The internet did not just watch the trailer. It dissected it, referenced it, made memes from it, and shared it in the way that people share something that feels personally meaningful to them. The trailer was not experienced as advertising. It was experienced as a reunion. The marketing campaign was reportedly one of the largest promotional efforts Disney had ever undertaken for a single film, with a total promotional value estimated at $250 million. Brand partnerships with Dior, Google, Coca-Cola, Mercedes-Benz, L'Oreal, Grey Goose, United Airlines, Zillow, and Thierry Semi transformed the film into what marketing experts call the participatory cultural experience rather than a conventional advertising campaign. Old Navy released a capsule collection that included a replica of the cerulean sweater that Miranda famously degrades in her iconic speech. Starbucks released promotional drinks. Google Shopping built a campaign around it. These were not just corporate tie-ins. They were acknowledgments that The Devil Wears Prada had become a cultural reference point so embedded in the popular consciousness that it could be used to sell almost anything to almost anyone. Anne Wintour and Meryl Streep appearing together on the May 2026 cover of Vogue completed the cultural loop in a way that felt simultaneously planned and genuinely extraordinary. The fictional magazine and the real magazine, the fictional editor and the real editor, occupying the same cover of the same publication in the same month that the film opened in theaters. It was the kind of moment that only happens when a piece of fiction has been absorbed so completely into the culture that it begins to blur with reality itself. The historical connection, how it echoes real journalism. The film's treatment of the journalism crisis is historically grounded in something that has been unfolding in the real world with increasing speed and increasing pain for the past 15 years. Since the 2008 financial crisis, newsrooms around the world have shed hundreds of thousands of jobs. Major publications that were once considered institutions of permanent cultural significance have closed, merged, or been reduced to skeleton versions of their former selves. The classified advertising revenue that once funded local newspapers evaporated when Craigslist and later other platforms made it freely available online. Display advertising moved to digital platforms where Google and Facebook captured the overwhelming majority of revenue. Subscription models have worked for some publications but have not replaced the economic ecosystem that once funded journalism at scale. The specific detail of the layoff by text message in the opening of The Devil Wears Prada 2 is not invented for dramatic effect. Multiple real journalists and real newsrooms have experienced exactly this kind of impersonal, digital, unceremonious termination. BuzzFeed News, a publication that was once celebrated as the future of digital journalism, laid off its entire news division in 2023. The Los Angeles Times conducted mass layoffs in 2024. Numerous local newspapers have closed entirely, leaving communities without any local coverage of their own governments, schools, and civic institutions. The film opens in that pain not to be provocative but because it is the reality that the characters and their audience both inhabit. The film's resolution, in which a billionaire acquires a struggling media institution and saves it from a cost-cutting corporate owner, is both a fantasy and a comment on a real phenomenon. Billionaires have indeed acquired major media institutions across this period. Jeff Bezos bought The Washington Post. Mark Benioff bought Time. Laurene Powell Jobs took a major stake in The Atlantic. These acquisitions have saved some publications from immediate closure, but they have also raised genuine questions about independence, editorial integrity, and whether journalism can sustain itself as a public service when its survival depends on the personal goodwill and financial priorities of individual wealthy people. The film presents the billionaire savior narrative with enough self-awareness to hint at these questions without fully resolving them. The legacy of the original and what the sequel adds. The Devil Wears Prada, the 2006 original, holds a specific and unusual place in cultural history. It is one of those rare films that entered the language of everyday life so completely that its references are understood by people who have never seen it. The cerulean speech is quoted in articles about fashion, about class, about media, and about the economics of taste. Miranda Priestly is invoked whenever anyone wants to evoke a particular kind of demanding, exacting, brilliant, and terrifying authority. The phrase "that is all" is used by people who could not tell you which film it came from. The film achieved the highest form of cultural penetration, which is the point at which its ideas live independently of the work itself. The sequel arrives in 2026 with the advantage of that cultural foundation and the challenge of living up to it. What it adds to the original is a perspective that the first film could not have had because the world had not yet arrived at it. The original showed ambition within a stable system. The sequel shows survival within an unstable one. The original asked what it costs to climb. The sequel asks what it means to endure. The original was a portrait of an era at its peak. The sequel is a portrait of that era in its twilight. And taken together, the two films form something more complete and more historically valuable than either one alone. They are a before and after photograph of an industry, a culture, and a way of understanding power that the 20 years between them transformed completely and irrevocably.